The bank notification pinged on Ethan Caldwell's phone, another desperate plea from his mother. "We need $5,000 for the mortgage, sweetie. You're our rock." He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering, the weight of being the family's lifeline crushing his chest. At 32, Ethan had spent a decade funneling his tech startup's earnings to his sprawling family in rural Indiana. But tonight, in the heart of Chicago's Pride Festival, he felt something snap. He stood amidst a sea of rainbow flags, the air alive with music and laughter, yet his heart thundered with a secret he'd buried for years. Beside him, Javier Torres, a barista with a crooked smile and eyes that saw through Ethan's polished exterior, nudged his shoulder. "You okay, man? You look like you're carrying the world." Ethan forced a smile, his tailored suit out of place among the festival's vibrant chaos. "Just family stuff," he muttered, but Javier's gaze lingered, warm and knowing, unraveling the walls Ethan had built. They'd met 3 months ago at Javier's coffee shop, where Ethan's daily order of black coffee turned into lingering conversations about art, dreams, and the lives they wanted to live. Tonight, Javier had dragged him to the festival, insisting Ethan needed color in his gray world. As they weaved through the crowd, Ethan's phone buzzed again. His sister, Lila. "Mom says you're ignoring her." "Don't be selfish, Ethan." Selfish. The word stung, a dagger from the family who'd taken his money but never his truth. Growing up in a conservative town, Ethan had learned to hide his attraction to men, burying it under achievements and dollar signs. He was the golden son, the one who'd escaped to Chicago, built a tech empire, and sent checks home to keep the Caldwells afloat. But love? That was a sin they'd never forgive. Javier stopped at a booth selling rainbow bracelets, his fingers brushing Ethan's as he handed him one. "Try it on," he said, his voice soft but daring. Ethan hesitated, the simple act of wearing a pride bracelet feeling like a rebellion against his family's expectations. He slipped it on, and Javier's grin lit up the night. "See? You're not invisible here." The words hit Ethan like a wave. Invisible. That's what he'd been, shrinking himself to fit his family's mold. He thought of the countless nights he'd spent alone, terrified of what it meant to want someone like Javier, someone who laughed freely, who wore his identity like a badge of honor. Javier was everything Ethan wasn't, unapologetic, alive, and unafraid. As they moved toward the festival's main stage, where a drag queen belted out a ballad, Ethan's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a voicemail from his father, Robert, his voice gruff. "Your mother says you're at some event. Don't embarrass us, Ethan. You know what we think of that lifestyle." The word lifestyle dripped with disdain, and Ethan's grip tightened on his phone. Javier noticed, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" Ethan opened his mouth to lie, to say it was nothing, but the truth clawed its way out. "My family. They think being here, being with you, is wrong." Javier's face softened, but his eyes burned with defiance. "Then why are you still their ATM? You don't owe them your soul, Ethan." The words were a spark, igniting something in Ethan he'd suppressed for years. He looked at Javier, at the festival, at the bracelet on his wrist, and felt a surge of courage. But courage came with a cost, and Ethan wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. As the night deepened, they danced under the festival lights, Javier pulling Ethan into the rhythm of the crowd. For the first time in years, Ethan felt free, but the weight of his phone, buzzing with his family's demands, anchored him to a life he wasn't sure he could escape. The festival's energy pulsed around Ethan and Javier, but inside Ethan, a storm was brewing. The next morning, back in his sleek Chicago apartment, Ethan stared at his laptop, the bank account he'd linked to his family's needs glaring back at him. Over $200,000 sent in the past year alone. Mortgage payments, car repairs, Lila's college tuition. He'd never said no, not once, because saying no meant confronting the truth. His family loved his money, not him. Javier sprawled on Ethan's couch, sketching in a notebook, his presence a quiet anchor. "You're thinking too loud," he teased, glancing up. "What's eating you?" Ethan sighed, shutting his laptop. They called again. "My dad left another voicemail, saying I'm confused for being at the festival. They don't even know about you, and they're already judging." Javier set his sketchbook down, his expression serious. You don't have to keep proving yourself to them, Ethan. You're not their wallet. You're a person. The words hit hard, but Ethan shook his head. It's not that simple. They're my family. I can't just abandon them. Javier stood, crossing the room to sit beside him. Family doesn't make you feel like you're drowning. Family lifts you up. He placed a hand on Ethan's knee, a gentle challenge. What do you want, Ethan? Not them, you. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted Javier. He wanted to stop hiding. But the thought of cutting ties with his family, of losing the only roots he'd ever known, terrified him. He built his life around being their provider, their savior. Who was he without that role? Before he could answer, his phone rang. His mother, Diane. Her voice was saccharine, manipulative. Ethan, honey, we're counting on you. The roof's leaking again. Can you send $10,000? You know we'd be lost without you. Ethan's jaw clenched. I'll see what I can do, he said, ending the call. Javier watched him, his silence louder than words. That afternoon, they walked along Lake Michigan, the city's skyline shimmering in the distance. Javier shared stories of his own family, Puerto Rican immigrants who'd embraced his queerness with open arms. They weren't perfect, he admitted, but they chose love over judgment. Your family could too, if they wanted. Ethan wanted to believe it, but memories of his father's sermons, his mother's pointed silences, told a different story. That evening, at Javier's tiny apartment, they cooked dinner together, the domesticity of it stirring something in Ethan. As they chopped vegetables, their shoulders brushing, Ethan felt a glimpse of the life he could have, one where love didn't come with strings. But the peace shattered when Lila texted, "Heard you're hanging out with some guy. Dad's pissed. You're gonna ruin everything, Ethan." The words were a gut punch. He showed Javier the message, expecting sympathy, but Javier's eyes flashed with anger. "They don't get to control you like this," Javier said. "You're not their puppet." "I know." Ethan whispered, but doubt gnawed at him. Could he really walk away? The next day, Ethan's father called, his voice cold. "People are talking, Ethan. They saw you at that parade. You're shaming us. Stop this nonsense, or you're no son of mine." Ethan's heart raced. He wanted to scream, to tell his father he was in love with Javier, that he was done hiding. But the words caught in his throat, and he hung up, shaking. Javier, who'd overheard, pulled him into a hug. "You don't have to fight this alone," he said. For the first time, Ethan let himself cry, the weight of years pouring out. He wasn't ready to let go of his family, but Javier's arms around him felt like a promise, a life where he could be whole. The days following his father's ultimatum were a blur. Ethan threw himself into work, his tech startup's demands a welcome distraction from the war inside him. But Javier's presence was a constant reminder of what he stood to lose or gain. They spent evenings exploring Chicago's hidden corners, art galleries, jazz clubs, quiet bookstores, each moment pulling Ethan closer to a truth he couldn't ignore. One night, at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, Javier leaned close, his breath warm against Ethan's ear. "You're allowed to choose yourself, you know. You don't have to be their martyr." Ethan stared at the skyline, the lights blurring as tears welled. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. "They've always needed me. If I say no, what happens to them?" Javier took his hand, his grip firm. "What happens to you if you keep saying yes?" The question lingered, unanswered, as Ethan's phone lit up with another text from Lila. "Mom's crying. She says you're abandoning us for some fling. Fix this, Ethan." A fling. The word cheapened everything he felt for Javier, reducing their connection to something dirty, disposable. He showed Javier the text, expecting anger, but Javier's face was calm, resolute. "They're scared of losing control. You're not their son right now, you're their bank account. But you're more than that to me." Ethan's chest ached. He wanted to believe Javier, to let himself fall into the life they could build together. But fear held him back, fear of being alone, of being the villain in his family's story. The next morning, Ethan received an email from his mother, a long, guilt-laden plea. "We raised you to be better than this, Ethan. Your choices are tearing us apart. Send the money for the roof, and come home. We can fix this." Attached was a photo of the family at Christmas, Ethan's smile forced, his eyes hollow. He showed the email to Javier, who read it silently, his jaw tight. "They're manipulating you," he said finally. "They're using love as a weapon." Ethan knew he was right, but the guilt was a vice around his heart. That afternoon, he wired the $10,000 for the roof, hating himself for it. Javier didn't judge him, but his silence spoke volumes. That evening, they attended a poetry slam in Wicker Park, where Javier performed a piece about identity, his words raw and electric. Ethan watched, mesmerized, as Javier bared his soul to the crowd. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and Javier's eyes found Ethan's, a silent question in them. "Will you ever be this free?" Later, as they walked home, Ethan stopped under a streetlight, his voice trembling. "I want to be like you. I want to stop hiding. But I don't know if I'm strong enough." Javier cupped his face, his touch gentle but fierce. "You're stronger than you think. And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Ethan kissed him, right there on the street, the world fading away. It was a declaration, a step toward freedom, but the shadow of his family loomed, threatening to pull him back. The kiss changed everything. Ethan woke the next morning in Javier's apartment, sunlight streaming through the window, Javier's arm draped over him. For a moment, he felt whole, like he could leave his family's expectations behind. But his phone, buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand, dragged him back to reality. His father's text was blunt. "Come home this weekend. We need to talk about your behavior." The word behavior twisted like a knife. Ethan showed Javier, who sighed, pulling him close. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Ethan shook his head. "They think they can fix me." Javier's eyes darkened. "You're not broken, Ethan. You never were." The words fueled Ethan's resolve, but doubt lingered. He agreed to visit his family in Indiana, hoping, foolishly, perhaps, that he could make them understand. Javier offered to come, but Ethan refused. "This is something I need to do alone." The drive to his hometown was a descent into memories. The small, conservative town hadn't changed. Same church steeple, same judgmental stares. At the family's weathered farmhouse, his mother greeted him with a brittle smile, his father with a nod. Lila and his younger brother, Nate, sat at the kitchen table, tension thick in the air. "We're worried about you," Diane began, her voice trembling for effect. "You're not yourself, Ethan. This lifestyle you're chasing, it's not you." Ethan's heart pounded. "It is me," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I'm gay, Mom. I've always been. And I'm in love with someone." The room went silent. Robert's face reddened. "Don't you dare bring that sin into this house," he spat. "You're our son, but you're choosing the devil." Lila chimed in, her voice sharp. "You're embarrassing us, Ethan. People are talking. And what about the money? You're going to cut us off for some guy." The accusation stung, but it was Nate's silence that hurt most. His little brother, the one Ethan had paid for summer camps and braces, wouldn't meet his eyes. "I've given you everything," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "My whole life, I've been what you needed. But I can't keep pretending I'm someone I'm not." Robert slammed his fist on the table. "Then you're no son of mine. Get out." Ethan drove back to Chicago in a daze, tears blurring the highway. When he reached Javier's apartment, he collapsed into his arms, recounting the fight. Javier held him, his voice steady. "You told them your truth. That's more than they deserve." But the rejection gnawed at Ethan. He spent the next day in a fog, ignoring calls from his mother, who left voicemails begging him to come back to God. When Lila texted, demanding money for Nate's school fees, Ethan's resolve wavered. Could he really abandon them? Javier sensed his turmoil. That night, he took Ethan to a quiet park, where they sat under the stars. "You're enough," Javier said. "You don't need their approval to be whole." Ethan clung to those words, but the pull of duty was strong. He wasn't ready to let go, not yet. Back in Chicago, Ethan tried to rebuild. He and Javier grew closer, their relationship a refuge from the storm. They spent weekends exploring the city, from lakefront trail bike rides to late-night tacos at a food truck. Javier's laughter, his unwavering belief in Ethan, was a lifeline. But the shadow of Ethan's family lingered, their demands relentless. One evening, as they watched a movie in Ethan's apartment, his phone lit up with a message from Nate. "I don't care who you love, Ethan. I just miss you." The words cracked something in Ethan. He called Nate, who admitted he didn't share their parents' views but was too scared to speak up. "I don't want to lose you," Nate said, his voice small. Ethan promised to stay in touch, but the call left him torn. Could he salvage a relationship with Nate while distancing himself from the rest? Javier listened, his hand on Ethan's. "You can love them and still set boundaries," he said. "But you have to choose what's healthy for you." The next day, Ethan received a letter from his mother, handwritten and dripping with guilt. "We're struggling, Ethan. The bank's threatening foreclosure. You're our only hope." Enclosed was a bank statement showing their dire finances. Ethan's instinct was to send money, but Javier's words echoed, "Choose what's healthy." He didn't send the money. Instead, he wrote back, his words careful but firm. "I love you, but I can't keep carrying this burden. I need to live my life too." Posting the letter felt like shedding a weight, but guilt still gnawed at him. At work, Ethan's startup was thriving, a new app launched drawing investor interest. But success felt hollow when his family's rejection loomed. One night, at a gala for Chicago's tech scene, Ethan brought Javier as his date, a public declaration of their relationship. They danced under chandeliers, Javier's hand in his, and for a moment, Ethan felt invincible. But the next morning, Lila called, sobbing. "The bank's taking the house, Ethan. How could you do this to us?" Her words were a punch to the gut. Ethan hung up, his hands shaking. Javier, who'd overheard, pulled him close. "You're not responsible for their choices," he said. "You've given them enough." Ethan nodded, but doubt lingered. He spent the day researching resources for his family, charities, financial counselors, hoping they could stand on their own. That night, he and Javier attended a support group for queer people estranged from their families. Hearing others' stories, Ethan felt less alone, but the pain of his family's rejection was still raw. As they walked home, Javier stopped, his eyes serious. "I love you, Ethan, but you need to decide what you're fighting for, us or them." The words were a wake-up call. Ethan knew he couldn't keep straddling two worlds, but choosing himself meant letting go of the only family he'd ever known, and the thought was terrifying. The turning point came unexpectedly. Ethan was at his office, reviewing contracts, when his father called. "We lost the house," Robert said, his voice flat. "You could have saved us, but you chose him." The accusation hung in the air, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel guilt, only anger. "I chose myself," he said, his voice steady. "I'm done being your wallet." He hung up, his heart racing. For years, he'd let his family's needs define him, but Javier's love, his own strength, had shown him another way. He opened his laptop, logged into the bank account, and froze the recurring transfers to his family. One click, and the lifeline was severed. When he told Javier that night, Javier's face lit up with pride. "You did it," he said, pulling Ethan into a kiss. "You're free." But freedom came with grief. Ethan mourned the family he'd hoped for, the one that could have loved him for who he was. Nate's occasional texts were a small comfort, but the rest of the Caldwells cut him off, their silence louder than their demands had ever been. Ethan threw himself into his new life. He and Javier moved in together, their apartment a mix of Ethan's sleek minimalism and Javier's colorful chaos. They hosted dinner parties, attended pride events, and built a chosen family of friends who celebrated them. Ethan even started mentoring queer youth at a local community center, finding purpose in helping others navigate the pain he'd faced. But the past wasn't done with him. One day, Lila showed up at his office, her face drawn. "We're living in a motel," she said. "Mom's sick, Ethan. She needs you." Ethan's heart twisted, but he held firm. "I've given all I can," he said. "I sent you resources. You need to figure this out." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You've changed. You used to care." "I still care," Ethan said, his voice soft but resolute. "But I can't keep saving you at the cost of myself." She left, and Ethan felt both loss and relief. He called Javier, who met him at a quiet cafe. Over coffee, Ethan confessed his guilt, his fear that he'd abandoned his family. Javier listened, then took his hand. "You didn't abandon them. You set a boundary. That's love too, for them, and for you." That night, Ethan wrote a letter to Nate, promising to be there for him, no matter what. It was a small bridge, a hope for reconciliation. But for the rest of his family, Ethan knew he'd made the right choice. A year later, Ethan stood on a Chicago rooftop, Javier at his side. Their friends gathered for their engagement party. The city sparkled below, a testament to the life they'd built together. Ethan's startup had gone public, his success no longer tied to his family's approval. He wore a rainbow bracelet, a symbol of the freedom he'd fought for. Nate was there, the only Caldwell who'd shown up. He'd moved to Chicago, living with roommates and working part-time while studying. "I'm proud of you," he told Ethan, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." Ethan hugged him, tears in his eyes. It wasn't the family he dreamed of, but it was enough. His parents and Lila hadn't reached out, their silence a choice Ethan had learned to accept. He'd sent them one final letter, offering resources but making it clear he was done being their lifeline. They hadn't responded, and Ethan was at peace with that. As the party wound down, Javier pulled Ethan to the edge of the rooftop, the city stretching out before them. "You did it," Javier said, his voice soft. "You chose yourself, and you're still standing." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "I chose us," he said, kissing Javier under the stars. The journey hadn't been easy. Ethan had lost a family, but he'd gained a home, not just in Javier, but in himself. He'd learned that love wasn't about sacrifice. It was about truth, boundaries, and the courage to live authentically. As they danced, the city's lights blurring around them, Ethan felt a weightlessness he'd never known. He wasn't the family's wallet anymore. He was Ethan, flawed, human, and finally free. The story ended with a promise. No matter what came next, Ethan would face it with Javier by his side, his heart open, his truth unapologetic. And with one click, he'd rewritten his life, not as a savior, but as a man who loved fiercely and lived on his own terms.